Welcome to a presentation on the Baha'i Faith and its teachings. We're going to go back in time to the last century, to the Middle East, and to a country that was then called Persia, because this is the starting place for the birth of the Baha'i Faith. The prophet founder of the Baha'i Faith, Bahaullah, whose name means the glory of God, was born in Persia, in its capital city, on November 12, 1817. He was a member of the nobility and raised in this home in Tehran. 2,500 years ago, Persia was the greatest empire on earth and celebrated for its art and architecture, its capital city of Persepolis. It became a Muslim nation, and so it can be said that Bahaullah was raised among the Muslims as Christ was raised among the Jews. He was accustomed to wealth and comfort, but nevertheless he shared what he had with the poor, becoming known as the father of the poor. His father, Mirza Abbas, was a minister in the court of the king. Baha'u'llah's given name was Mirza Hossein Ali Nuri. His father owned whole villages like this one, which Baha'u'llah later inherited. He was married in this room in 1835 to the beautiful Asiya Khanum. Together they had 3 children, which Baha'is called the Holy Family: Abdul Baha, servant of Baha'u'llah; Bahia Khanum, meaning the greatest holy leaf; and his youngest son, Mirza Mehdi, the purest branch. In 1844, a young man took the name Bab, meaning gate, and in this house in Shiraz, he proclaimed to his first believer that he was the gate of the promised one of all religions. Baha'u'llah became a follower of the Bab. 8 years later, 2 deranged Babis made an attempt on the life of the king. Baha'u'llah was wrongfully accused of plotting the assassination and was thrown into a dreadful dungeon known as the Sia Chal. 3 flights underground, there were no windows, there was no bedding, there were no toilet facilities. The prisoners were chained together, but in that great darkness a light emerged. Around his neck was placed chains weighing more than 100 pounds, the most dreaded in all of Persia. They cut so deeply into Baha'u'llah's flesh that he bore their marks to the end of his days. He said later, one night in a dream, these exalted words were heard on every side: "Verily we shall render thee victorious by thyself and by thy pen. Ere long will God raise up the treasures of the earth, men who will aid thee through thyself and through thy name." He and his family and followers were exiled to Baghdad in Iraq, and they had to cross the snow-covered mountains of eastern Persia in the heart of winter. They arrived in Baghdad in April of 1853. About a year later, Baha'u'llah went alone into the mountains, where he roamed for 2 years. Every messenger of God has had a period of solitude. He returned to Baghdad in 1856 and continued teaching the religion of the Bab for the next 7 years, promising that a new messenger would soon appear, whom the Bab called him whom God would make manifest. In April of 1863, Baha'u'llah proclaimed to his followers and family that he was that promised one all the faiths were awaiting. To Israel he was neither more nor less than the incarnation of the everlasting Father. To Christendom Christ returned in the glory of the Father. To Shia Islam the return of the Imam Hussein. To Sunni Islam the descent of the Spirit of God, Jesus Christ. He was exiled again to Constantinople in 1863, where he remained for 3 months before being again exiled. This time he was sent to Adrianople on the European continent. During the time he was in Adrianople, Baha'u'llah wrote to the kings and rulers of the earth, summoning them to a council table of nations. He wrote to Franz Joseph of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Shah of Iran, Napoleon III, Emperor of the French, Queen Victoria of England. He also wrote to Pope Pius IX, the Pope at Rome, saying among other things, O Pope, rend the veils asunder. He who is the Lord of Lords is come overshadowed with clouds. He verily hath again come down from heaven, even as he came down from it the first time. It is their duty, Bahaullah said, to convene an all-inclusive assembly. They must put away the weapons of war and turn to the instruments of universal reconstruction. And by doing so they would then fulfill that great prophecy of Isaiah, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. Bahaullah was exiled altogether 4 times, from his native Persia to Baghdad in Iraq, to Constantinople for 3 months. For 5 years he was in Adrianople. He passed through Alexandria in Egypt on his way to his final destination, Akka, the prison city of the Turks, where he spent the last 24 years of his life. The Bible says, "And I will give the valley of Achor for a door of hope." Bahaullah was imprisoned in the tallest building in the city. The Persians have a proverb that says the air of Akka was so foul that a bird flying over it would drop dead from the stench. This was Bahaullah's cell, where he spent 2 years in the citadel. Tragedy struck the Holy Family in June of 1870, when Bahaullah's 22-year-old son fell through an unguarded skylight and was mortally wounded. His dying wish was that those pilgrims who were prevented from entering the prison city would be able to meet with Bahaullah. In 1873, Bahaullah revealed his Book of Laws, which is called the Most Holy Book. These laws will someday provide guidance for all mankind. In 1886, Bahaullah's beloved wife and companion, Asiya Khanum, the most exalted leaf, passed on to the next life, which Baha'is call the Kingdom of Abha, a Persian word meaning glory. In April of 1890, an Englishman entered the prison city of Akka. His mission was to obtain interviews with Bahaullah, who was then here at Baji outside of Akka. He was the distinguished Cambridge Orientalist by the name of Professor Edward Granville Brown. He had a series of 4 interviews over the 5-day period. These are Brown's words. Here at Baji was I installed as a guest, and here did I spend 5 most memorable days. It was in truth a strange and moving experience, but one whereof I despair of conveying any save the feeblest impression. My conductor paused for a moment while I removed my shoes. Then, with a quick movement of the hand, he withdrew, and as I passed, replaced the curtain. A second or two elapsed ere, with a throb of wonder and awe, I became definitely conscious that the room was not untenanted. In the corner where the divan met the wall sat a wondrous and venerable figure. The face of him on whom I gazed I can never forget, though I cannot describe it. Those piercing eyes seemed to read one's very soul. Power and authority sat on that ample brow. No need to ask in whose presence I stood, as I bowed myself before one who is the object of a devotion and love which kings might envy and emperors sigh for in vain. That all nations should become one in faith, and all men as brothers. That the bonds of affection and unity between the sons of men should be strengthened. That diversity of religion should cease, and differences of race be annulled. What harm is there in this, Bahaullah said. Yet so shall it be. These fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come. Just 2 years later, at Baji, Bahaullah left this world after a nearly 40-year ministry, most of it spent as a prisoner in an exile.